Hello, folks. How you doing today? Welcome to this session, folks, in Evaluaciones de las Habilidades Lingüísticas 2, okay? So in this session, folks, we're gonna discuss something different, okay? That this is gonna be something practical. We're gonna see the definitions, the characteristics, and the purposes of a test construction. Okay, and in the next presential session, we're gonna we're gonna make a practical class about this. Okay, so as you can appreciate on the screen, folks, we got a short introduction for this session that says in English language teaching, assessment is a fundamental tool for measuring a student's progress and effectiveness of the teaching learning process. Task construction is a meticulous process that requires careful planning to ensure that assessment instruments are valid, reliable, and aligned with learning objective. In this session, we will explore the fundamental principles of task constructions, the most commonly used item types, and the best practices for designing effective assessment. Something important here, folks, is that at the moment when we construct a test, we need to take into account the principles of test constructions. Okay, we need to wonder ourselves: is the test valid? Is the test reliable? As you know, something that we have been discussing in the first sessions about the principal assessments, right? So, as I said before, that is our topic today, folks, test construction, and we're gonna see some important aspects that we need to take into consideration for this, okay? Okay, the objective, folks, that we got for these sessions is to understand the fundamental principles of task construction in English language teaching, focusing on validity, reliability, item types, and best practices for designing effective and fair assessment. Okay. So as usually, folks, I like to start the class with a speaking activity, and we're gonna see some questions. What about this one, the first one? What is the purpose of a test in education? What do you think is the purpose? You as future English teachers, when you will be designing a test, what is the purpose of doing that? What do you think? Remember, folks, that regarding to this question, remember that the tests, ¿verdad? The test helps assess a student's knowledge and skills, right? It also allows the teacher to check if learning objectives have been met. Remember that, as I said before in the previous classes, when you're making a lesson plan, something important that we need to take into account are the objectives, okay? Because at the end, they have to be met, right? And through the test, folks, we can identify area where students need more support. Okay, that's the purpose that we got it when constructing a test in education. Let's see the second one. Have you ever taken a test that you felt was unfair, and why? What do you think about this question, folks? Let me tell you, folks, that for some students, they have been felt the test has been unfair because they say that some questions were not related to what they studied, right? Or probably the instructions were not clear and they didn't understand what to do. So something important, folks, in test construction, it's the instructions, okay? So we need to be very clear with the instructions. Because if those instructions are very clear, so students can understand what they're going to do, okay? So let's see the question number three. What makes a test difficult or easy for students? Based on your experience, folks, what makes a test difficult or easy for you? Well, if we talk, folks, about if it is easier or harder, the first thing that we need to take into consideration is the clarity of the question, right? So if we quite understand what a question is asking for, so it's easier, right? And a test can be difficult, folks, when especially when teacher includes some topics, right? Some topics that they haven't studied. So in that case, remember that's why that I told you in the introduction that we need to take at the moment when making a test construction, we need to take into consideration the principal assessment, right? Because if you decide, if you make up your mind to test a new topic that wasn't taught in the classroom, the test is not going to be valid, right? Okay, let's move on to next question. Do you prefer multiple choice tests or open-ended questions? Why? Or do you think that depends? I have heard folks, I have heard many students that says that they prefer multiple choices because they can guess the answer if they don't know it, right? Or as I said before, so most of students prefer multiple choices because they have developed the technique at randomly. Okay. And some others prefer open-ended questions because remember that that's one of the way that they can explain their thoughts, right? But this depends if you studied or not, right? Let's see next question. What are the characteristics of a good test? Well, as you know, folks, and as I mentioned before, uh, to be to have a good test, this should be clear, this should be fair, this should be relevant to what was taught, and it can be a short combination between the easiest part and the most difficulty part, right? Because remember that at the end we got a grading system, right? And the grading system we need to identify, we need to value which section of the test has the has great scores, right? Has great score than others, right? So let's see another question. If you were a teacher, how would you design a test? That's a really good question. What do you think about this? If you were a teacher, now I ask you, would you include the different types of questions to assess various skills? What do you think? Because if he asked to me the question, I would say yes. I would say yes. I would include different types of questions to set various skills, especially when those classes, when those courses are integrative, right, into the major. So we need to assess the full macro skills, right? And I would balance, of course, the difficulty and easy questions so our students feel don't discouraged, right? Let's see another question. Have you ever taken a test that didn't measure your real abilities? What happened? What do you think? This can happen, folks, especially when the questions on the test were tricky, right? And probably you didn't have time to think properly how to look for a way how to answer it, right? Or when you take such a test, folks, that is focused only on memorization, right? So for some students memorization can work, but for some others not, right? Some others prefer to learn better through practices and not on memorization, right? Now let's move on to the definition of what is task construction. So what comes to your mind, folks, when you hear task construction based on your experience? Okay, what comes to your mind? Well, folks, let me tell you that task construction is a systematic process for designing tasks that measure knowledge, skills, and competences. Okay, and it also includes item selection, validation, and result analysis. Okay. So the feedback that we give at the end, right? And this has to be directly related to learning objectives. As I said before, folks, Evan, when you're constructing a test, you have a purpose, okay? What do you want a student to achieve at the end? What do you want to achieve at the end with with that test, right? Remember that I've always said that when you're making a lesson plan, we can include different types of activities, different types of integrative activities, but at the end, the most important part in that is the objectives, okay? Because remember that we need to achieve them at the end of the class. In this case, at the end of the application of the test on students, you're gonna uh you're gonna get the results analysis there, right? Now, let's see some of the characteristics, folks, that we got for a good test. This is not new for you folks, because in the previous sessions and even in a course before this one, you were you were taking, right, testing language skills at the beginning, right? Number one, sorry, number one, and you have been discussed about the principal assessments, right? Like validity, right? Remember, folks, that validity is that we have as a teacher, as teachers, we have to measure what is supposed to, right? So if you, for example, if you want to assess speaking, so let's look up for some techniques. Let's look up for some activities related to speaking, like role plays, like a scenario in a restaurant, right? So that they have to be valid, right? Reliability. Reliability, folks, is remember that here the most important is the consistent results that you get at the end, right? So we can say, folks, as an example, that a multiple choice test is reliable if questions are clear and well designed, right? For example, an oral interview might be less reliable if examiners aren't trained. Something that happened, okay? And objectivity, folks, is that remember here something important is when the results are unbiased, okay, and not influenced by the evaluator. For example, if we talk about the multiple choice test, remember that this is objective, okay? An essay can be graded by the teacher is less objective, right? But when we use a rubric for grading such activity, so that makes that make assessment more objective, right? Because everything's clear. In a rubric, remember that we got the level of performance, the parameters that we that a student should know what they are going to be evaluated on such tests, right? We also have practicality, folks. Do you remember practicality and authenticity? Remember that practicality, in other words, is terms of time, resources, and logistic, okay? For example, if a 10-minute speaking test is practical, an hour individual speaking test for 30 students isn't, right? So we need to take into consideration that, right? And the authenticity, folks, this is here we need to take into account, folks, the real life language use, okay? The real life language use. For example, when you write an email to a friend, that is an authentic activity, right? That could be an authentic test, right? Or the role playing, a job interview is based on real life scenarios, right? Now, let's see the types of tests that we got, folks. Something that we have been discussing in the previous sessions, and we got diagnostic test. Remember, the purpose of this test is to identify how much English students know, what are their weaknesses, what are their strengths. So that's the purpose of diagnostic test, okay? And based on the weaknesses that you found, so we can start working on that, right? Just for enhancing their abilities, right? Another types of tests that we got is the formative test, folks. As we have discussed in some sessions, remember that formative test is the purpose of this one is to check the progress, right? To check constantly the progress of the students, right? If they quite understood the topic, or if they got some doubts, we can clarify that. Okay, that's the purpose of formative test. Then we got the summative test. Remember that at the end of a class, at the end of a course, at the end of of a course, we need to grade students because that's the policy that we got in education, right? So once that we have found the weaknesses on students, once that we have been working on those weaknesses, then we have been checking how the students have been progressing in their learning language. Then at the end of the course, we need to grade, we need to get worth some point to the students based on that. Remember that here the summative test, they are objectivity, right? Because the objective that you planned at the beginning, they have to be achieved at the end, okay? And other one, folks, another uh types of test is the aptitude test. Remember that here we can measure, we can enhance, we can put into practice the values that we got as human beings, as students, as teachers, like honesty, respect your peers, integrity, and so on. Okay, so we need to value this. I don't know that yeah, I think I'm pretty sure that you have heard about the admission test that some of the public institutions, public universities, they made an aptitude test, right? So some others is a psychological test. So where you need to analyze some scenarios, some real scenarios, and based on your attitude, you have to respond to that, right? So now let's see the kind of items that we can include on the test, but that depends on the sort of test that we got. Okay. For example, if the test you consider that is objective, we can use the close-ended items, right? But if we consider that the test is subjective, we can include open-ended items, right? Let's see some examples for objective or closed-ended items. We got multiple choice, okay, where we got some questions, where we got some statements, and we got three or four possible answers, and we need to circle or we need to underline the answer that we consider is the most suitable for each statement, right? Also, we have the true or false. You know, you read an statement, and based on the on your knowledge and based on your background knowledge, you have to answer if it is true or false. Most of the time, when when the statements are false, we need to justify why, right? Matching in matching, folks, it could be like it could be like matching the word with its definition, okay, or based on the reading. If you're assessing reading, based on the reading, the word, this word it refers to on the paragraph number two, this word refers to, and you look for the a synonym of that, okay? We also have fill in the blanks, okay? Fill in the blanks. Most of the time, as teachers, we put some words to be classified, to be selected, and you have to fill in the blanks on the sentence or even on the questions, okay? Now, some of the some of the subjective items that we got, as I mentioned before, we got the open-ended questions. Remember that if you ask a question, so that the answer, the kind of answer here can vary because their opinion, Maria's opinion, it's gonna be totally different of Charlie's opinion, right? So that in that case, they are called subjective. Okay. We also have essays. Remember that when talking about essays, folks, we got different types of essays like opinions essays, compare and contrast essays, cause and effect essays. And let's suppose that you're working on opinion essays. You're gonna give your own opinion about a topic, right? So, and your opinion is gonna be totally different from your peers, right? Also, we have the short answers and the performance based tasks. Okay. So now I got a question as an example. Which of these better measures reading comprehension? So I mean that when you want to measure reading comprehension, which of these would you use, or which of these do you think that is the most suitable for measuring reading comprehension? What is the main idea of the text? Just a simple question. And you know that when we got an open-ended question, all of the answers may vary, right? Or what is the main idea? That could be like a multiple choice, okay, based on the reading. You you have the question, what is the main idea, and then you can provide three or four possible answers where students have to select or underline or circle the answer that they consider is the right one, right? So that this one I would like to discuss to you in the next sessions, okay, at university, right? So as a conclusion, folks, remember that a well-designed test should reflect learning objectives, okay? Not all the tests items are suitable for every skills, but something important that every test can be adapted, especially into the different types of students need, okay? And an ongoing review and improvement of tests are essentials, okay? So now, folks, I'm gonna share another important aspect that I would like to talk to you, to discuss to you, and are the parts of that test specification, okay? So just give me 1 minute. I'm gonna share, I'm gonna project that other one, right? Okay, folks, here we got the steps that we're gonna take into consideration when constructing, okay, a test. So these have the steps, okay. This is just like theoreticals, okay, class, and then in the next session in the university, we're gonna put into practice, okay, because we're gonna construct a task specification of this one. The first thing, the most one of the most important step that we need to take into consideration at the beginning is the objective. So what are going to be the objectives to test there? Remember that objectives are specific statements, are measurable statements, and clearly defined, especially. Okay. So another step that we got is the construct or subconstruct to test. Okay, so here we need to identify the skills of the sub skills being evaluated. Okay, so the for example, if you got a reading comprehension, so what do you think is the sub skill that you can evaluate there? It could be vocabulary, as the example before that I provided about for example, according to the paragraph number 2, the word test refers to, and they have to understand by context, right? They need to carefully analyze the paragraph number 2 to answer in the right way the questions. Okay, so the sub skills in that case, in this example, is vocabulary, right? So another important step when constructing task, folks, is the item type, okay, or the item sort. So here, we need to select the appropriate questions format based on the construct, right? So the items must be objectives or subjective. Remember that if you're gonna work with multiple choice, fill in the blanks, remember that they are controlled techniques, right? So they are called closed-ended items, right? And they are objective. But if you want to work with uh open-ended questions, essays, role plays, remember they are some of them are semi-controlled, some others not, okay? And they are subjective items, right? So, another important steps, folks, that we need to take into consideration is the number of sentences. Remember that we need to determine how items will be included, and especially on the grades, right? If it is the final test, as you know that, for example, in the university, the final test is worth 40 points, right? So you need to analyze how many sentences or how many questions you're going to include there, and how many points is going to be awarded each questions or each sentence, right? So I mean that we need to balance the coverage and student fatigue. Okay. So another step that we have is the time allocated, folks. Time allocated. Remember that one of the principal assessment that we need to take into consideration with this one is the practicality. Okay, so if you quite know that you don't have enough time for doing a 5 pages, for example, a 5 pages test, so don't do it. Don't do it. Okay. Try to manage the time for this one, because you remember that the test has to be practical. Okay. And another one that we got, folks, is the grading system. Something important. Okay. For example, if we got in your test 2 sections, okay, 2 sections, you need to balance. And if the test is worth 20 points or 40 points, you need to balance. Section A how many points do we have there, and section B, how many points. Remember that this one you need to analyze what is the level of complexity that each sentence or each item has, and according to that one, you can balance the point of that, right? Well, folks, that has been all for this session, folks. Remember, as I said before at the beginning, the practical class is gonna be at university. We're gonna discuss this there because we're gonna make a specification test, right? So, bye bye, folks. See you next class.